So thank you so much for giving me time, Chris. I would like to introduce you to my network, my friends, and the folks who are listening to the Superhuman Project podcast. So Chris Ye is a serial entrepreneur, investor, writer, a speaker. He is a well-known figure in the Silicon Valley. So I met Chris last year at the National Venture Capital Association Symposium. And since then, we have been in touch. Chris has been kind and gracious enough to give me time for this podcast. For folks who are listening, Superhuman Project is an initiative for capturing, looking at the mindset of successful people like Chris and dissecting it and figuring out how they think, how they view life, and looking at exploring multiple lives, multiple careers, and multiple disciplines that all of us might be looking at. Instead of just trying to focus on one job, one discipline, it's all about breaking into different fields, how to do that, and not just living full, meaningful life. So I'll hand over to Chris to give a quick introduction, and then I'll go through the list of things that I want to know from Chris. Chris?
Many thanks. And I think you did a fantastic job of introducing me already. What I'll just let folks know up front is that, of course, if you like what you end up hearing today, you are welcome to go visit chrisyeh.com. That's CHRISYEH.com to see my other writings and other activities. And you can generally find me anywhere on social media as well. Just look up Chris Yeh. And again, that's CHRIS. That's the usual way. And Yeh, YEH.
Perfect. So, and Chris has written multiple books, and he is friends with Reid Hoffman, the famous Reid Hoffman. And in fact, I got a chance to meet with Reid as well, along with Chris last year. And Chris is raising his new fund. We'll talk more about that and how cool that is, the approach, the process behind it. It's something revolutionary that I personally think, and anybody who is looking out for, especially the limited partners who are looking for making new investments, their fund is something which you definitely have to look at. So let's start with this, Chris. I shared this with you, the idea of Superhuman Project. We spoke about it, about folks who are stuck in a job, in a rut, or folks who are just beginning college, and especially due to the pandemic, a lot of people, their jobs were impacted, and now they are at crossroads thinking what exactly they want to do. Maybe looking at their wish list, and whatever that was on hold, they want to look at and pursue that. So I want to ask you, from your perspective, when you heard about Superhuman Project, what went through your mind and what was your reaction?
When I first heard the name, I thought it was very apt because one of the concepts that my co-author Reid Hoffman and I talk about sometimes is the concept of superpowers and how individuals have superpowers. Now, again, as we remember, Superman was the very first superhero. He basically has the ability to do anything. But since then, most superheroes are not omnipotent. They are specific things that they can do and specific things they can't do. And the superheroes who do the best are the ones who really understand themselves and hone the superpowers that they have. Great example of this, of course, being Batman, a normal human being who happens to be very rich, but who hones his sense of strategy and skill and outthinking the opponents, which then becomes his superpower. So one of the reasons I love the idea of your podcast is to help people embrace and find their own superpowers, the things that are going to make them successful and bring them fulfillment.
That's great. That's great. So let's build on that. Finding superpowers, which ties back to more about self-awareness. And a lot of folks are always struggling to find if that is about themselves, about their strengths, about dabbling in different areas. And so what's your thought process there? How would you advise maybe your younger self in the process of self-awareness?
Well, I think that the key is to identify things that you both enjoy and are really good at. And you'll be able to tell this by trying them out. Now, one of the things that people often do is they try to think in advance, oh, this is going to be what I do. I'm like, well, maybe when you get into it, it won't necessarily be exactly your cup of tea. A lot of people, for example, I remember when I was in college, would go into pre-med. They always dreamed that they would become doctors. And along the way, a lot of them realized, maybe this isn't for me. Similarly, a lot of people end up going to law school. They're not sure what to do with their lives. They go to law school and they enjoy law school. They think they'll enjoy being a lawyer. But in fact, many of them don't. The legal profession has some of the highest rates of alcoholism and suicide of any profession, largely because becoming a lawyer is very different than going to law school. And so, studying and reading books, those are all fine. But really the only way to discover what are the things you really enjoy and what are the things you're really good at is to go out and try them and do them. And you do some stuff, you try some stuff, you work on some projects, and if they work out well, do more of them. My own career as a writer is an example of this. I grew up dreaming of being a writer someday, but the step to becoming a writer was not let me go ahead and live in a basement and work on a novel for 5 years and then release it out into the world. It was to write a lot of little things, whether it was articles for magazines or writing my own blog posts, and really refine my practice over time, both by practicing and getting those 10,000 hours in, but also by getting feedback from the outside world and seeing how people reacted to what I was writing. So honing your superpower is really about trying things and being honest with yourself about whether or not you really enjoy it and whether or not you're really good at it.
That's very helpful. Now, for folks who have multiple priorities, all of us are juggling home, work, and there are a lot of other things that we get that are thrown at us. So in terms of time management and finding time for exploring or dabbling in these new areas, what's your advice there?
So when it comes to finding time in our busy schedules, which is always a challenge, the big thing is to block out the time in advance on your calendar. I sometimes jokingly say that Google Calendar must be the most important and powerful force in the universe, because when you have an appointment on your calendar, you just show up and you do it. There's no question in your mind. And it's just a piece of software, right? But for us, the calendar represents a commitment. Well, in order to figure out what your superpower is, you've got to commit to yourself. You've got to go ahead and say, I'm going to spend this time writing, or I'm going to spend this time singing, or I'm going to spend this time practicing my martial art, or I'm going to spend this time building out this new technology. Whatever the case may be, block out the time in advance and let the power of Google Calendar get you to actually do it. Otherwise, what you'll end up doing is you'll be thinking, someday I'm going to do this, maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after, and you'll look up and years will have passed and you won't have made progress. But if you put it on your calendar and you set aside time just to work on that, you're going to make progress and eventually you're going to achieve what you want.
Got it. Now, in terms of that, we have blocked our time and we are working on trying this new skill. What's your advice on how to find markers for pivoting or utilizing, some of the concepts from your book, Blitzscaling, for scaling up and just going further in it?
Well, it's always a bit more of an art than a science, because you have to, on the one hand, be persistent and keep going even when things don't look so promising at the beginning. But on the other hand, you also have to have the ability to recognize when something isn't working out. So the method that Reed and I recommend is the method of having an investment thesis. Very much the way that a venture capitalist would go about investing in a company. Venture capitalists always explicitly has to make a decision at every stage whether to continue investing in the company or whether to go ahead and write it off. And the way they do this is by having an investment thesis, which is, this is how this company is going to succeed. These are the markers of success. And as long as I'm confident that the company is on the right track, I'll continue backing it. But if I get to the point where I lose that confidence, then the company either has to regain that confidence or I'm going to stop investing. And that's the same discipline you could bring to your own activities. So you block out the time, you try it out, and you think to yourself, how confident am I that this is going somewhere? And if all the evidence mounts and you lose confidence, it's time to switch, time to try something different. But this is where the idea of passion and love really comes in. So I did so much blogging and writing, and I did it because I wanted to do it, not because I said, this is the pathway that will somehow lead me to being a best-selling author. I did it because I enjoyed putting words together. I enjoyed sharing my thoughts with the world. I enjoyed hearing back from them. And that joy, that love, that passion allowed me to keep going, even when there wasn't specifically a financial or economic reason for me to do so. Now, in the long run, it's been enormous and an incredible boon for my life. But for the first 5, 6, 8, 9 years, even, you'd be hard pressed to say, well, this is why you're successful.
Yeah, so in terms of the investment thesis, I'm sure you would agree that there are VCs that probably decide when to pivot or not participate in future rounds versus the founders are always thinking about, they are so passionate and they still want to continue developing, working on their idea. So don't you think there is always a balance of trade? You have to figure out when to stop if things continue not working, maybe like you mentioned, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever years, and explore something else. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's really important for founders to continually re-examine their own investment thesis. I can tell you for a fact that it's not always the case that founders will want to keep going no matter what. I was a founder, and there were times when I built a business and I recognized that the way we're going simply isn't going to work. And there was an investment thesis, and I then pivoted and said, okay, we're going to try something different. And if that didn't work, then eventually it was like, well, I have to find a graceful way to get out of this. And that's one of the reasons why I encourage entrepreneurs not to raise money until they feel very confident about what they're doing. Because if you raise money, at least if you're a responsible individual, you'll feel a responsibility to those shareholders to try to get them a return. And that may keep you going long after your original investment thesis, your original desire has gone away. So I think that it is really critical to think carefully before you take that money. Now, assuming that you have taken that money and you're an entrepreneur and you're still confident that venture capitalists are not, guess what? You should keep going. You should say, listen, I know that you're smart. I know that you have good reasons for believing this is not going to work, but I think it is. And I'm going to keep going. And if I have your support, that's great. And if I don't have your support, that's unfortunate, but I'm still going to be working to make you money. And you can see this play out. If you take the example of Twitter, Twitter did not begin as Twitter. Twitter began as something called Odeo, which was a podcasting company that Ev had created. And Odeo wasn't working. It was too early. Podcasts had not become what they were today. And what they ended up doing is they lost confidence in the investment thesis. And they went to the shareholders, the venture capitalists, and said, well, we don't think this is going to work out. If you want, we can give you your money back. There's other things we want to try. And if you want, you can choose to continue to have your money in us. And some of the investors chose to get their money back. But the ones who chose to continue their money on the project ended up being the shareholders in Twitter, which of course worked out very well for them. So that's a great example of how if you're a founder, you can actually offer the choice to your investors. But at the same time, you should emphasize, listen, we feel good about our ability to come up with something interesting, but we don't want to drag you along for the ride unless you really commit. And having people commit consciously is so much better because now in their own minds, they're committed and they're going to figure out how they can help you and what they can do to make your path an easier one.
No, that's very helpful. And for folks who are listening who are not just founders, they are folks who are in a job and they are looking to either jump the ladder, move from one business function to another business function or one industry to another. I would say the translation would be figuring out that sweet spot. If you think you are making some headway in your side hustles, then probably continue doing that and taking calculative risks for borrowing money for your next venture or for your next job. I know in your book you talk about, in Blitzscaling, you talk about embracing risk and uncertainty. So how can you describe that in the context of an individual who is dabbling, trying to find his superpowers, but he's not sure, he has to take some risks and figure that out?
Yeah, so one of the things I'll sometimes tell entrepreneurs, and I've applied this in my own life, is you have to be on the lookout for what I call the decisive moments in your life. And there are moments in my life that I can picture in my own mind. I can remember exactly when they occurred and what happened, where I was forced to make a choice that was going to fundamentally alter the trajectory of my life. And in those decisive moments, if you are prepared for the fact that decisive moments will arrive, and if you are prepared to make these decisions quickly, you're going to be in a much better place to actually make these transitions. So let's say you're working at a job and you have a side hustle and you're working on that side hustle. It's something you really believe in. There may come a time when there will be a decisive moment where you have to choose between the two. A great example of this is when I was helping get Ustream off the ground. I was still working as the marketing person for a startup, and I was doing both of these things at once. And the time arrived when at Ustream we had the opportunity to hire a complete technical team away from another company. And this technical team had enormous expertise in live video and would give us a huge advantage. And they were based in another country, and so they were less expensive, which is also good. But they would only jump ship if we could say we had $250,000 in the bank. We were largely bootstrapped at that point. I was putting things on my credit cards to actually buy them, like $10,000 worth of Adobe Flash server on my own personal credit card. And so I saw that and I said, this is our moment. This is the time that we really have to make that call. And I said, I am going to quit my job and I'm going to raise that $250,000 over this weekend. And that's what happened, right? We got this opportunity on a Thursday or a Friday. I reached out to people over the weekend. I was able to get the $250,000 committed based on all these conversations. I went to people and I said, I've never asked you to invest in something, but this is one I believe is going to be successful. And that was a decisive moment that helped change the trajectory of my life because, of course, Ustream did go on to be successful and IBM bought it for $130 million. But so much of it could be traced back to one or two decisive moments. So having the ability to recognize those decisive moments when your side hustle might just become your real hustle, if you're prepared for the fact that that might arrive, you'll be in a better position to make those decisions. Now, when I made that decision, I didn't know things were going to turn out for the best. And there's always going to be risk. And it's always possible. I could have quit my job. We could have raised money and the company could have failed. And we would have lost the money of all those people who trusted me. And I would have gone into debt because I had racked up all these bills financing the company. And that was a risk that I was willing to take. I understood that the potential downside was there. But I felt like this was a decisive moment where there was a chance to change the trajectory of my life. And so I took it.
That's interesting. So let's talk about the decisive moment story you shared. We get these for all of the folks who are trying to discover their superpowers, or they are busy with their side hustles. They are facing these decisive moments on a daily basis. And we have stress from chasing multiple deadlines. So what's your secret, or what's that one tip you use to manage these moving targets, decisive moments on a daily basis, and how you maintain your sanity?
So it's definitely a challenge to maintain my sanity. One wonders whether I've actually been able to do it. But there's a couple of things that have helped me do this. So the first is just the right mindset around these things. One of the things I realized early on in my entrepreneurial career, this was back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, is I said, you know what? There are only 24 hours in the day. And even if I magically did not have the need to sleep, and I worked when everyone else is sleeping, there's still only those 24 hours, and there's only so much that I could do. And there is no scenario under which I could actually do everything that I could possibly do to make this company succeed. It just is physically impossible. And so once you realize that, you say, wait a minute, so I'm holding myself to this standard where even if I had the magical power not to sleep and I worked 24/7, I couldn't actually meet it. Why am I trying to hold myself to a standard that is just literally impossible? And so I adopted then the mindset of you can never get everything done. You can never take advantage of every opportunity. All that you can do is create a stack ranking of what you think is most important and start with the most important things first. And recognize that not everything's going to work out, not everything is going to get done, And most importantly, if you're on a team and you're able to delegate, not everything's going to get done the way you want it to if you ask someone else to do it. But the choice is not between I do it and it's perfect, or I get someone else to do it and it's not perfect. The choice is between I do it and therefore there's 10 other things that don't get done that I could do, and only I could do, versus something which someone else could also do. So learning to let go of that perfectionism, learning to accept that we'll never get everything done, learning to delegate to others and be willing to accept the consequences. Those are all critical to remaining sane, because if you try to follow the approach of I'm just going to do everything and do it perfectly, you are going to go insane.
That's very helpful. Yeah, I also, read that book by Richard Koch about 80-20 principle, and I always use that concept of the stack ranking that you mentioned, figuring out which are those 20% tasks or goals that are giving me 80% satisfaction, or that are giving me 80% of the outcomes that I'm looking forward to. And in your book, you also mention something about speed over efficiency. I think that probably relates to what you talk about in terms of managing these or juggling these different multiple priorities. So in terms of figuring out the stress part, how do you manage that? I'm sure we all cannot avoid that. So do you have a routine in terms of, like you mentioned, having blocks for the day? Would you have a routine for doing a particular type of activity in a particular block to get the maximum out of the 24 hours that you have set up, to get the satisfaction in terms of that you squeezed out every inch of energy you had in you with all the attention that it required? How do you do that?
So, of course, first, the most important thing, per what we just discussed, is to accept that you're never going to get perfect at it. You're just going to try to be as good as you can, and you're just going to try to improve. And your focus is, let me just continue improving, as opposed to let me achieve perfection. But underneath that, some of the things that I do that I think are really important. The first thing that I do is I put a priority on basically keeping the body going, the machine going. I tell people you're a machine made out of meat, and you need to keep it in good order if it's going to perform. And one of the analogies I use is that many people, especially founders, seem to believe that through the power of iron will, they can do anything and they can ignore restrictions, they can ignore problems. And this is something that we lionize in someone like Elon Musk, who sleeps 1 hour a night and is constantly working and sleeps in the factory floor and manages to get all these things done and is superhuman. And that's all fantastic. And I'm very grateful to Elon Musk for destroying his own life on our behalf. But that's not what I recommend to people. What I recommend to people instead is to say your body is a machine and you should treat it well. If you think about the tools that you have, let's say you have a lawnmower and you use that lawnmower to mow your lawn. If something goes wrong with the lawnmower, you don't yell at the lawnmower, damn it, lawnmower, man up. If you just had enough willpower, you'd be cutting the grass better. No, you say, okay, what's happened? Is the blade dull? Did a part work loose? What do I need to do to repair this and get this working again? The same applies for yourself. You need to be thinking about what are you going to eat? What are you going to do in terms of exercise? How are you going to get enough sleep? One of the things I do is I take naps on a regular basis. If I'm tired, I'm going to take a nap. I sometimes find that I wake up earlier than I want and I'll feel tired during the day. Instead of saying, I'm just going to power through this, I'll say instead, let me take time for a nap. And by the way, during this pandemic, it's the perfect time for that. In the old days, only weirdos like me would keep a cot in the office to take a nap. Nowadays, you just walk over to your own bedroom and take a nap. So my gosh, develop the habit of napping now while you can. It's the easiest possible time to do it.
That's very helpful. And what about, so in terms of your routine, do you follow a strict routine in terms of not just exercise, doing some form of meditation? You mentioned some specific diet and all. Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, so let me lay out some of the specific things I do. And again, let me emphasize this doesn't mean it's the right thing for you, just what I do. So there are several things. First of all, I do try to practice the attempt at intermittent fasting. Not quite there, but where I don't eat breakfast anymore, I'll drink coffee instead. And the coffee I drink is unsweetened. I do add some creamer to it, but instead of using traditional cream or non-dairy creamer, I actually use soy milk. So I try to use relatively unsweetened soy milk, and that's what I use in order to make it palatable. And then I'll finally go ahead and eat. Usually I can make it to around 10 or 11 a.m. before I have a snack. Oftentimes for snacks, I'm going to have something that is relatively healthy and low carb. So I often like to eat soybeans, for example. It's something that comes from my Chinese heritage, I suppose. I'm just used to soybeans as opposed to viewing them as some sort of exotic vegetable. I'll have salads. I will drink hot tea. I'll do all these different things. And then, of course, when it is time to eat, I'm going to try to eat generally a low carb diet. And I prepare most of the foods myself as opposed to, ordering out or eating prepared foods. And that helps me make sure that I'm getting a good diet in. As far as exercise and activity, I have to find ways to fit it into a busy schedule. So I have exercises I do for physical therapy because a year and a half ago, I ruptured my Achilles tendon, much like the unfortunate athletes for the Golden State Warriors who continue to do this. Poor Kevin Durant and now Klay Thompson. It's a very difficult injury to come back from. You have a lot of rehab and physical therapy. And so I will sometimes be doing these stretches and things like that while I'm actually on a telephone call, because I can have my headset in and I can be doing these things and concentrating and at the same time be able to accomplish something. So I find time in my schedule for these things. And the same is true for some cardio work as well. If I have the kind of meeting where I don't need to worry about the sound quality and the visuals as we are doing here on this particular podcast, I will sometimes take a call from my recumbent bicycle so that I can pedal and get some cardiovascular exercise while this is going on. Now, a lot of this is multitasking, but I would argue that multitasking where one of the tasks is just moving your legs is actually fine.
Yeah, I agree. So, yes, I think what you are saying is having a specific routine for a day keeps us on check, keeps us on schedule and on track for all kinds of explorations and side hustles that we might be engaged in. Now, towards the end of the day, what do you define as a good day? What's your definition of that today was a good day?
That is an interesting one because I think that the overall definition of a good day can vary a bit. Oftentimes, I will define a good day as one major thing happened that was a good thing. And if that happens, then the rest of the day, whatever happened is probably going to be fine. So I like to focus on those big wins. But if there isn't a big win, then, I will look towards the little wins. I'll look towards things like at the beginning of the day, I might write down a series of things that I want to do. And did I find time to really carve out the hours to do them? And if I've been able to focus and actually work on the things that are most important to me, then I feel like it's also a good day.
That's helpful. Now, my question tied to this one is more about disappointments. How do you handle disappointments?
So it's tough because when you're in the startup business, there's going to be a lot of disappointments. Most startup businesses don't work out. And heck, and in life in general, most of the things you try are not going to work. It's like they say about baseball. In baseball, if you succeed 3 out of 10 times, you're doing great. And I feel like it's even tougher when you're trying to get new things off the ground. So dealing with disappointments is something you have to get used to. I find that it still isn't something that I'm completely over. When some bitter disappointment occurs, it's still going to affect me. Nobody can just shrug it off. But what I do come back to is an old Russian proverb that I remember reading in children's literature when I was growing up, which is that the morning is wiser than the evening. So there's very few things in life which are not going to seem a little more manageable after you have a good night's sleep. And so what I understand when something is going on where there's a major disappointment is I will set expectations appropriately. I'll say, okay, this has been a terrible disappointment. Let's figure out what steps we can initiate to ameliorate the disappointment. But let's also accept that today is going to be a bad day. Today is just not going to be as productive as it otherwise would. I'm going to be distracted. I'm going to be emotionally compromised. And what I need to do now is just limit the damage and not try to push myself through this, but understand that I'm going to have to process this. And then part of that is then allowing a good night's sleep to work its magic. It's almost like your emotional immune system goes to work and helps clear up the infection or help repair the damage. And so by the time the next day rolls around, I feel ready to say, okay, well, here are some things I listed as ways to address this issue. Let me go ahead and start addressing them. This pandemic is a great example of that. When the pandemic hit, it was a bitter, bitter disappointment for several reasons. First of all, I had many different well-paying speaking engagements that were on my calendar, and it quickly became apparent that they were all going to be canceled, which was, of course, disappointing both from the perspective of I love audiences and also disappointing from the perspective of I like to get that money too.
Yeah.
And at the same time, when the pandemic hit, and this is the beginning of March, this was also the time in which I was just kicking off the fundraising for Blitzscaling Ventures. And so I'd started setting up meetings, and all of those meetings were canceled. And so this was a bitterly disappointing time when I realized the world is shutting down. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to be poorer. I don't know when I'm going to be able to get to this project and make it happen. And so that was tough. But what I did is I said, okay, well, let's ameliorate the issues. Let's first of all think about, how do we account for and reach out to all those clients and people that I'm talking about speaking with and just let them know, listen, it's going to be fine. If we need to reschedule, if we need to cancel, it will all work out. I understand the situation. And same holds true for the various people we're talking with about investing. Say, listen, the world is in meltdown right now. It's not a good time to talk. Let's just pick this up after things calm down. And what I then did after, a couple of days of complete shock, this was not one that went away after a single day, as you know. I mean, many of us were shell shocked for days or even weeks afterwards. But what I said is, okay, let me now flip this around. Let me think to myself, what is it that is going to be easier to accomplish during this pandemic and during this lockdown than it will be when this is eventually over? And by reorienting myself and saying, well, what can I do to really leverage the changed circumstances, to lean into the changes that have hit the world? Then I was able to, instead of looking backwards and worrying about how to come back from problems, I was able to look forwards and say, well, what new opportunities do I have? And so I did more podcasting. I did a lot more virtual speaking. We eventually started fundraising for Blitzscaling Ventures again, realizing that this was the only time in history we could find limited partners to write $1 million checks without seeing them in person, which meant a greater emphasis on raising money from investors around the world instead of just the ones I could drive to here in Silicon Valley. And all in all, things have worked out pretty well. But it depended on giving myself the space to process the disappointment and shock. And then based on the emotional immune system coming in and allowing me to actually then reorient myself towards the future.
That's very helpful. Now, since you spoke about Blitzscaling Ventures, it would help for the investors and the folks who are listening to this podcast if you could tell us how cool Blitzscaling is, what's the concept. Could you share that with us?
Absolutely. And thank you again for bringing this up. I swear to the audience, I did not bribe you in advance to bring this topic up. But when it comes to Blitzscaling Ventures, it is, of course, based on the concept of blitzscaling, which, as you referenced, is prioritizing speed over efficiency in the face of uncertainty. And that's something you do when you want to win a winner-take-most market, where if you achieve critical scale first, then you can dominate the market for decades and have a license to print money. That's what we all want out of this world. So what Blitzscaling Ventures does is it focuses on having a way to invest in the companies that are absolutely the most blitzscalable. So what we do with Blitzscaling Ventures is we try to find ways to invest in the startups that are the most blitzscalable. And we do this by investing in the best entrepreneurs with the most scalable business models alongside the top venture capitalists. We review all the deals that are being done by the top VCs. And from those, we filter them down, which is usually about 100 deals a month, to 1 to 3 finalists, the companies that out of that entire universe of companies that have raised money from the top venture capitalists in the world that month are the most blitzscalable. I then reach out to the CEOs of those companies and tell them, listen, we've identified your company as one of the ones that has the chance to be the next Amazon or Alibaba. And what we'd like to do is have a discussion and see if we can invest in you. And if you take our money, then I the co-author of Blitzscaling, will help you go through this process, help you figure out the right strategy to be as blitzscalable as possible, and help you navigate the obstacles to scale that come up as you're growing rapidly. And so our whole objective is to invest in about 4 amazing companies and CEOs per year. And by investing in those 4 amazing companies and CEO, we hope to build a portfolio of blitzscaling companies that will generate incredible returns, but also have a huge impact on the world.
Now that's amazing. And for the investors who are listening to this podcast, I was excited to hear what Chris is doing with his venture, with this fund. I also want to mention, think about this. Using Blitzscaling Ventures as a fund, they have a scoring model, and they would be scoring companies and choosing the best of the best that have a chance of becoming the next Amazon or next Alibaba. And your money is in being invested in those curated companies. The chances of success go real high. And that's what excited me. So yeah, definitely please check out Blitzscaling Ventures and reach out to Chris if you would like to know more about it. So moving on.
And in many
Yeah,
ways,
go ahead.
I was going to say, in many ways, it almost feels like it's unfair, right? What we're able to do is we're able to look at all the deals that are already the best deals in the world because they're the best investors in the world. And then we're able to pick and choose. And out of those deals, we're going to take a tiny percentage of the ones that we think are the absolute cream of the crop and then invest in them. And again, let me emphasize, of course, we're adding value. We're helping those companies grow and scale. But the real credit for those belongs to the entrepreneurs, the CEOs, the people who are operating those companies. And what we want to do is just help those people as much as possible.
That's good. So one thing which I would like to know from you is, who are your ideals? Who are the people you look up to, and why you look up to them?
Well, this is a great question because it's actually a question that I answer in my book, The Alliance. One of the exercises we talk about there is that one of the ways you can figure out what really matters to you is to think about the people who are your personal heroes and why they're your personal heroes. And once you know why they're your personal heroes, you know the things that you value. So the 3 people that I actually chose, and this is a classic, choose anyone from history. The 3 people that I chose were from different worlds. The first person I chose was Abraham Lincoln, who, of course, is a great American president who really understood the power of compassion, who was willing to work with a team of rivals, and who preserved the country and spoke so eloquently about the need for forgiveness. And I just see so much to admire in that. And the second person is Mr. Rogers, the great television personality, who really understood and had this incredible empathy for children, and who focused on the power of being nice, of accepting people for who they were, and for understanding that the world is a complicated place and that we all need to help each other out a little bit more. And then finally, I talked about David Packard, one of the legendary co-founders of Hewlett Packard. And what David Packard really represented was a different way of managing. Hewlett Packard was famous for the HP way. They trusted their people. They believed that the best way to get the most out of people was to trust them, to give them freedom, to encourage them, and to really represent that sort of classic relationship between a leader and a follower, or a company and employee, where they're really in it for mutual benefit. So those were the 3 heroes that I picked, and I stand by those picks.
Now I like them. That's good. In terms of the reason I asked you that question, who are your ideals? I know that you hang out with some of the most famous and celebrated business executives in Silicon Valley around the world. And I would like to know how they think, or they're probably that one thing that you might have learned from them that you would give as an advice to your younger self, that one thing which just changed you, or just it was like an eye opener for you when you heard that from some of these folks.
Well, obviously, the person I've spent the most time with in that category is my co-author, Reid Hoffman, the legendary entrepreneur and investor. And one of the things I really learned from Reid was how to think bigger. And that's one of the things that's power to success. Obviously, part of what has gone into it is intelligence and hard work and all of these things. But Reed really approaches things with a level of intellectual rigor where he says, well, what is the biggest possible outcome we can have here? What do we really need to do to make this even better? He's never satisfied saying, okay, that's good enough. He's always asking, what can we do to make this better? And this even shows up in what he does when he does a speaking engagement. After every speaking engagement, he comes off stage. And if I'm there, I know that the first question he's going to ask is, what could I have done better? Because as you know, I do a lot of speaking engagements. If I came off stage and asked people, how did it go? They're going to say, wow, it went great. It was fantastic. And no one's ever going to say, that really sucked. You were really terrible out there tonight. And you have to be really open to that feedback and really open to improvement if you're going to be able to make that happen. So I would say that if you are open to feedback, open to improvement, that unlocks the ability to really think bigger and go for some truly audacious goals. And that's something that I've learned and tried to apply. I think Blitzscaling Ventures is a reflection of that.
What is that one book that you always go back and refer or maybe gift people, and what do you like about it? What draws you to that particular book?
So one of the greatest books of all time, at least from a business and professional perspective, is an old classic called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And I could see you're nodding and
It's
smiling.
my favorite.
This book as well.
Yeah.
It's incredible. This is a book that I didn't read until after I graduated from college, because it's got this cheesy title and it seems like it's written by some sort of huckster of some kind, and it's acquired this sort of negative connotation. But when you read the book, you understand it really is not like that at all. It really is about showing a sincere interest in other people. And the lessons I learned from that book have probably been more important than any other book I've read. I've read a lot of business books over the years. And just understanding, okay, can you find something to admire in the person you're speaking with? Can you show a genuine interest in what they're doing? And it really is a remarkable statement of how you could be not just a great salesman, but a great leader, a great collaborator, a great partner, all these things. And it's a tiny, slim book, and it won't take you long to read. And I highly recommend it to anyone out there who hasn't read it yet.
I totally agree. I couldn't say better for that. I actually listen to that book while I'm sleeping to get everything in my subconscious mind, and I love that book. I go back to it almost on a daily basis. So that's a awesome suggestion. In terms,
Great minds think alike.
yeah. In terms of for our listeners, what are your parting thoughts or words for folks who are joining the Superhuman Project community, who are looking at exploring multiple careers, multiple disciplines, who want to switch careers, jump the ladder? What's your advice for them?
So my parting thoughts and advice is this. I don't know if this is going to be our only life or not. That's something for theologians, philosophers, and other people to think about. But what I encourage you to do is to not get caught up in the same race that everyone else is running. Right? We have this notion in this world of, oh, there's a success track and I'm going to go to this school and I'm going to work at this company. And as a result of that, I'm going to be successful. And people try to plan out this very steady progression, almost like an escalator that then leads them to some final destination. And the world is far messier than that. And what I really think people should do is focus less on things like, what is my job title and how much money am I going to make? And more on, is this something that I really enjoy and am good at? Am I really getting a chance to spend time with people that I care about, that I enjoy being with, that fill me with energy and inspiration? And I think if you focus on doing things that you enjoy and are really good at, if you focus on looking outwards to the people around you and saying, how can I develop great relationships with them? How can I help them achieve different things? How can I then recruit people around me to achieve things? I think that's going to result in a much happier and ultimately more productive and lucrative life.
That's a great advice. So I thank you for your time, Chris, and I look forward to talking to you again. And for the folks who want to reach out to you, can you please share your coordinates with them?
Absolutely. As I mentioned back at the beginning, the center for everything is just chrisyeh.com, CHRISYEH.com. You can sign up for newsletters. You can read the different things that I'm writing. They're all labeled there, and there will be links to my social media presences as well. The other thing that is potentially interesting to entrepreneurs and corporate innovators is the Global Scaling Academy, which is just globalscalingacademy.com. This is a community for people who are pursuing scale, who want to blitz scale, who want to grow and build businesses and make a dent in the universe. And it's a chance to not only have access to great content from myself and other major thought leaders and authors, but also to be a part of a community that's really devoted to the issues of scaling. There are a lot of places that try to help you start up. We're really trying to help you scale, and we think we have a great community for content and those peer-to-peer connections with people who can really help you.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. Thank you for your time.
Huge pleasure, and I look forward to coming back on again.